Hello, I am the cartoonist M. Rashid. I decided earlier today, when I finished this new cartoon called A Classic Performance by the Fork Tongued, that instead of typing my artist description when I when I distributed my cartoon across my social media, that instead of typing my artist description, I was just going to do the video, which formally commits me to these things beyond the original purpose I stated in my intro video. So originally I was just gonna address those my most often shared cartoons, because I see people have been putting a spin on what they want to mean, trying to deliberately deflect from my message from their side, and provide my quote unquote word of God definitive explanation for what it means as the actual creator of the work. That was my original purpose. But now I'm like, you know what? I'll just go ahead and artist description video each one. So as I post them, now you can look for the link to the videos. I think I'll do, a link for both YouTube and BitChute. All right, so the title of this cartoon is references you remember the old cowboys and Indians, like days of North America, the original cliche or saying that the Native Americans used to have, or at least were written to have in the narratives of the time about the white men that they encountered and did business with, and they came to not trust them and refer to them as quote unquote white men speak with a forked tongue. So this particular cartoon, the idea for it, I was already playing around in my head for about a week and a half or so, because on the 4chan poll site during my lurking period, I came across somebody using that Barbary, the Barbary Pirates line, So on Quora, I see a lot of people talking about, especially in the early days when ADOS first started to rise, and the national discussion about reparations was really getting heat, when it first started, and everybody had their opinion about it. I'll revisit that later in another video. That's important to get back to, everybody's opinions about reparations and the inherent annoyance around it. But in this particular case, people were using it as a deflection, because as Dr. Martin Luther King pointed out, that the poor whites and the immigrants during the New Deal period, and even before that, the Homesteading Acts and all that, white people were given an economic floor and pulled up out of poverty as a group. Dr. Thomas Sewell, in his Black Rednecks and White Liberals essays, referenced the poor whites would have all this land and wasn't doing anything with it. You would go there and it'd just be overgrown with weeds and rusted beer cans and etc. They weren't doing anything. So the aristocracy, the concept that once the enslaved the enslaved black Africans back in the 1600s were first permanently delegated to be chattel, the bondsman class. When that decision was formally made, that from now on, these people will be the permanent bottom caste of society, the permanent slave class. At the literal exact same time, the white aristocracy was born. The concept of whiteness, So you're often conflate race, the Caucasoid race, based on physical racial phenotype traits, with the economic class of whiteness, the caste system that formed an aristocracy, that no matter where you fail economically, as long as you could formally identify as white, officially recognized as white, you would get these benefits in society. Whether you were the richest or the poorest, you could guarantee that you were above the black bondsman class. That's what happened. So after slavery, remember the other day we talked about how quickly the former slave, how quickly the freedmen started like elevating up in society, using their political savvy and their the fire of faith that came from now being free and the master of my own destiny and all that stuff. Like they had that on them enthusiastically, So they were like, okay, now it's time for us to now be full citizens, and that's not going to happen until we put in the work to make it happen. And obviously we've been thinking about this for a long time. So like all their moves inside of the 8 years of Reconstruction reflected that enthusiasm. I am free. Let's get it. So watching them, not only did their former masters and the former, even the whites who didn't have slaves, they were still had rights over the slave class. The poorest white could stop the most skilled slave, the most skilled and upstanding slave in the streets. And let's see your papers, Blackie. And just, abuse them in the streets. Like you remember the movie Ragtime. Remember that movie Ragtime? I think it came out in the early 80s. And Kohlhouse Walker Jr. was the name of that character. And what he had to deal with that fire chief, Kohlhouse Walker Jr. was like, he was a black scholar, walked in excellence, was dressed in the nines all the time, and he cut that figure, and the fire chief was the opposite of that. He was a piece of crap, and he was just abusing them and just entitled to his flesh. This was after slavery, but it was during like the Jim Crow period, so he was just entitled. Who is you that you get to walk around like this? I don't have a car like that, and I'm better than you because I'm part of the aristocracy, and you are not. So after slavery, I don't want you to rule over me. I don't want to watch you rise from slave to king, because that will make me feel a certain way, because I've had the full aristocracy under me this whole time, and I didn't do anything with it. I got free land from the government, and all I have is like upside down trailers and overgrown weeds on it. And meh, I'm free. I don't have to do anything with it. Well, that's fine. But the envy that's clearly around this narrative, this is real. This is real. And it's the nature of my conflict with that particular figure in the aristocracy, the one that traditionally was always recruited to be the slave breakers and slave takers and overseers and the police and the bounty hunters and you know that's the class that group was recruited from. And it didn't take much to history shows that it was that figure whose idea it was who first was pushing the idea to permanently make me the slave so he wouldn't have to be that role anymore. That was one of the lessons from Sewell's book that I just referenced. That was the guy. You just want to be left alone, because for 1,000 years or so in Europe, he was always the go-to bondsman. When the wealthy aristocracy needed something, they would just come get them and make them do it. And they were, of course, abusive about it, But he was the guy. And then once I showed up, the enslaved Africans in North America, he was like, well, use him. Leave me alone, And then the politicians that came from him agreed and was courting his vote, and then they made that happen. And that's where I live today. So when I say I want to be compensated, I want my the return of my stolen inheritance wealth. I'm owed by my ever complicit U.S. government for all the abuses that I've received these last 400 years. My people as a group are artificially impoverished by the jealousies and the greed of that one. That's why I am in the position I'm in today. The argument against that, well, not necessarily against. He's not bringing up that Barbary Pirates thing because he's against. Because he's actively trying to argue against me. That's not an argument. That's a deflection. And in this particular case, because of his demonstrated double-tonguedness, on the one side, he's trying to there was a time period, there were several of the sciences and institutional disciplines that were birthed specifically from the aristocracy trying to justify abusing me, why it's okay to keep me in a subjugated position. At the end of slavery, near the end of slavery, when that kind of fake pseudoscience was built up, and during Jim Crow too, it continued on, we freed these people, we do this all men are created equal talk. So, but we don't want to compete equally in the markets with the former slave class. We don't want to free them for first, and then when now they're freed, we don't want them to live the promise of the 1866 Civil Rights Act. So we want to keep them subjugated, continue to steal the fruit of their labor. So after slavery, I'm a citizen in the United States. Leave me alone. But there's all these areas I can't go, I can't do, the black codes are still being enforced, still put in place, but I'm being charged the full taxes of an American citizen. I just don't live an American citizen life. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 says I can do business exactly the way the white man does business. I can enrich myself through lucrative government contracts just like he does all the time. Like his rockets into space adventures today. The government just, here's some billions. Have fun. You know, the one whose father owned the emerald mine. Here, have some unlimited money. Have fun. I too. But, I admit that we're just talking about this, but it gets on my nerves. It's furious. And part of the fury is more than just the fight of what I'm talking about, but it's that forked tongue talk that I gotta listen to from this one. You know how he tries to justify this nonsense is he blames me that the reason I'm poor is because I'm lazy, blah, 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 which is nonsense. If I was inherently lazy, like this one talks, if I was inherently a criminal, the way the 13th Amendment loophole needs him to propagandize so that he can keep these for-profit prisons filled. If that was true, then you wouldn't have wanted me as a slave in the first place. I would have been like, just as problematic as you were when they had to use you as the bondsman class for all those centuries. There's nobody, like, the literature is full. Read Sewell's essay, The Black Rednecks and White Liberals. The title essay is Your Own People, various levels of wealth, who couldn't stand the poor whites when they had to use them for labor because they were problematic. They were everything that they say about me on 4chan. On 4chan, those guys talk about me the way their people talked about them. And it's probably the exact same people, other than 4chan is also full of foreign whites. Like, there's a lot of foreign white people on 4chan, like all over the world, who all have the same hive mind, that they're the brotherhood, they're all about that life. But the American one specifically is, when you came over to America, to North America, raw, and your sponsors originally fed you mash made from cracked corn, and he was the one who named you Cracker. You try to fork tongue clean it up, retro history, by saying it meant the crack of the whip. Nonsense. The term comes from the cheap food you were fed during the early days. Mash made from cracked maize in its early form, in that raw era. So I say, after all these abuses, centuries of abuses, and deliberately holding me back because you don't want to compete with me fairly in the markets, because you fear what will happen. You fear a topple of power. So you cheat. This little one cheats because he's the one that's most jealous and stuff. He didn't want to be the bottom cast. He was the bottom cast for a while, just being in Europe all that time. He would rather eat it and be, low caste but left alone, and at the very least get to say, at least he's socially, economically superior to me. He's good with that life. For all this bitching, as long as he gets to be a caste above me, he's fine. He loses his shit over the idea of now he's the bottom caste again, and he gotta yes boss at me. How they sound on 4chan, that's the root cause. That's what right there. For all his shit he talks, for all his nonsense, that's the root cause. Believe it. The higher ups, the 1% class, originally they didn't care. They didn't care who did the work or what, as long as that revenue was coming in, so he could live his fabulous lifestyle. He didn't give a care. He did not care who did the actual work or not. So when they made that deal with the poor whites to make me the permanent bondsman class, he was like, as long as you maintain it, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna partner with you. I'm gonna collude with you across economic lines and form the whiteness aristocracy. But you got to maintain it. You do it. You want it, you do it. Otherwise, I don't care who's the bottom caste. I don't care who's the bondsman, who does the work. So you can make yourself the middle management of the system, but it's yours. You do it. So that's the nature. That's how America's system functions. Before these new immigrants started coming and change, the Obama Kamala dynamic has changed certain of those dynamics. There's a new sheriff in town, if you will, and it's kind of changing how those dynamics look. Same in general, but some of that looks different. There's other classes of people, the POC BIPOC folk are now here. I referenced it a couple of days ago, I think, but that group are used to having, they're used to economic bottom caste where they're from. To a man, like every single country, they're used to like having a permanent poor bottom caste that they manage in some way or another. So when they show up, they recognize my history. They know my history and who I am and where I'm actually supposed to be. I was supposed to be made whole as a freedman, and I'm not supposed to be the bottom caste. If that was done correctly, but they cheated. The entire historic system of the 1619 Project, like anti-racism scholarship, reveals that it's been the big cheat. He does not want that balanced power to change. He doesn't want to risk it. He is competition adverse. And that particular competition, with me specifically, is what a lot of the conflict of the country is about. He doesn't even want to mention my name. He hates bringing the Negro problem up. He hates it because of what it represents. It represents you confronting what is real and dealing with it. You either live your values, and I'm talking either side of the aisle. Racism is absolutely bipartisan. Either side of the aisle, whichever one of you values, whichever. You live your values and compete with me fairly in the markets. Whatever you get, I get. And all the mess you talk about merit and bootstraps and all that stuff, that comes from making America, we all have equal access to the resources of our nation. And when the people had been wronged, we agreed that it is the right thing to do to make them whole for it. You being made quote unquote whole for shit you had no reason to get free windfalls of like land and money for centuries now. You've been raining unlimited gibs, if that's the pronunciation of your word, gibs, Gibs, gibs. You've been raining unlimited free land and gibs on yourselves for centuries, trillions and trillions, for centuries, for nothing, just because you are who you are and have usurped the system just for yourself to be a selfish jackass. While you're saying, well, you don't need nothing, you're just begging for gibs. So what? I'm owed my debt. And when I say I need, and this is my country with her resources that belong to me, just like it belongs to you. You're bringing like fresh off the boat immigrants, fresh off the across the border immigrants in the modern day and proposing giving them unlimited. That's how you function. So you determine who gets and who doesn't get. And the rhetoric you use in that is evil because you're a hypocritical jackass. You speak with forked tongue. The narratives you tell show you as a very low-level character. So the other day I referenced, we have no reason to take you at your word when you talk. Your reputation as the forked tongue being is as old as the country, older. So you can either live your values your value is to live low and propagandize as if you live high. Those are your values. It doesn't matter what you actually say. What matters what you do, what the record shows you are. Your values are that you are selfish, greedy beyond belief, and you are a coward. You hate competition. You don't want to compete, but you have the rhetoric of bootstraps and merit and stuff on you. But the way you function is as a grifting coward. That's how you function. That's your value. That's what you bring to the table. That's the nature of your era, of the civilization you built, using me as the footstool. So when you say intelligent or smart, you mean 3-card Monty is what you mean. You don't mean intelligence in the sense that we mean intelligence. You mean, how can I get over on somebody and take what they have and get away with it? How can I most effectively do that? That's how you function. And now your grifting culture is now total, from the highest levels of the country to the low. How can I get over on people, steal from them, and get away with it, and paint myself as the good guy or the norm or just how we do business on the other side? This is your legacy. This is who you are. This is your contribution to the human story. Grifting culture at the highest level. And you speak with the forked tongue in that. So you don't try to argue with me. You don't try to argue the points and make your point. No, you deflect. You create a false narrative that the North Africans weren't black people. They were magically some kind of special white people, especially the ones you find who are the most accomplished and the most awe-inspiring were the least black, according to your magical nonsense. And when I say a completely different ethnic group that has nothing to do with them in any way, shape, or form, especially when you're running your mouth, you make fun of the Afrocentric Black Americans. You make fun of those guys when they identify with the splendors of Egypt. You say, that wasn't you. That wasn't even you. But when I say, get me my reparations, when the ADOS activist is, where's my reparations? It's beyond time. You deflect and be like, well, what about those black North Africans? They were black as fuck, and they were doing all kinds of stuff to white people. But yesterday you said they weren't even black. How are they magically black today when you're held to the fire? You don't have an argument. All you can do is lie and grift and try to, yikes, no, oh no. I've been found out. Egad. That's you. Do better. You're I'll end it here. Peace.